Tonight, we drift to the quiet waters of Edo Bay, where the mist clings low thick as old scroll paper, and the air smells faintly of brine and pine. You're right there, as four black hulking steamships glide through the grey morning haze, like floating fortresses summoned from some fever dream of the future. Their smokestacks belch sooty clouds, and their cannons bark ceremonial thunder that rattles the fishing boats bobbing near the shore. But make no mistake, these aren't here to exchange recipes. These are the black ships of Commodore Matthew Perry, and they've come knocking with ironclads and ink pens. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and local time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world we're drifting off together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The ship's two massive steam frigates and two smaller sloops drop anchor on July 8, 1853. From the shoreline, you watch the villagers' eyes widen as they spot the alien silhouettes. These aren't ordinary vessels. They're armored, engine-driven, and they hum with unnatural force. The Japanese term kurofune, or black ships, captures the mood perfectly. They're symbols of something that doesn't belong, not just foreign, but wrong like thunder in a temple. The Tokugawa Shogunate, which had ruled Japan for 2.5 centuries under a strict policy of Sakoku national isolation, is about to receive its first rude awakening from the industrial age. No nation had approached with such audacity since the Dutch and Portuguese centuries earlier, and even those contacts had been trimmed and shackled to Nagasaki's tiny, man-made island, Dejima. This was a parade of power unlike anything Japan had planned for. Back aboard the flagship, Susquehanna Commodore, Perry isn't pacing. He's deliberate, sitting with his boots polished to mirror shine, rehearsing phrases and reading translations. He has a letter straight from US President Millard Fillmore politely demanding that Japan open its ports to trade, provide safe harbor for shipwrecked sailors, and perhaps, most awkwardly, join the family of nations being steamrolled into modernity. The Japanese coastal defenders, known as the Ometsuke, scramble with antique matchlocks and samurai swords, an army outfitted for a different century. You overhear the tension building in the local magistrate's voice as he dictates reports back to Edo. Strange men from the west. They do not kneel. They light fire without flint. Historians still argue whether Perry chose the bay for its symbolism or its vulnerability. Either way, his strategy was surgical: appear bold, look unstoppable, but keep a straight face of diplomacy. Just loud enough to spook, just polite enough to proceed. One overlooked detail: Perry's crew brought along an African grey parrot named Bobby, known for swearing in 3 languages and mimicking cannon blasts, which added just a pinch of surrealism to already tense exchanges. It squawked from a cage on deck as Japanese envoys arrived, casting glances between the iron muzzles of the cannons and this foul-mouthed bird of omen. You squint through the salt air as the Americans finally deliver their letter. Perry refuses to hand it over to low-ranking officials, insisting it be received by someone of appropriate dignity, as in someone important enough to know when they're being cornered. Eventually, through a dance of protocol and forced civility, the document changes hands. The message is clear: even if the ink is polite, you can open up willingly, now, or less willingly, later. The shogunate doesn't answer right away. They need months, no centuries of deliberation. But Perry, he's not interested in their traditions. He gives them a year, says he'll return with more ships. Spoiler, he will, and they'll be even bigger. But in this moment, as you sit cross-legged on the shore beside startled villagers and curious children, the fear is not just of invasion, it's of the unknown, a future written in steam steel and foreign syllables. You feel it too, your heartbeat matching the slow churn of engines from the bay. And so the black ships stay for days, then weeks, leaving behind more than smoke in the sky. They leave questions. About strength, about sovereignty, about whether Japan can remain unchanged when the world outside moves like a locomotive. You walk across the creaking deck of the Mississippi, feeling the weight of expectation in the timber beneath your boots. The sun glints off brass rails and cannon barrels. Every rope is taut, every uniform scrubbed spotless. And standing there perfectly still, like some carved statue of naval diplomacy, is Commodore Matthew Calbraith. Perry, a man who is not here to make friends. You catch the glint of his gold epaulettes before anything else. They shine like warning beacons, drawing your gaze to the stiff, commanding figure beneath a navy coat pressed sharp enough to slice negotiations in half. He doesn't speak much. When he does, it's brief, methodical, and edged with power. Perry isn't some wandering ambassador. He's a calculated instrument of statecraft. The US Navy didn't send him to chat, they sent him to change things, and he knows it. Aboard his ships, preparations are underway for the most dramatic diplomacy Japan has ever seen. Official letters are being translated, mess kits are polished to absurd shine, and on one deck, a small team is assembling a peculiar crate marked Demonstration Delicate. We'll come back to that. Perry had been hand-picked for this mission, not despite his rigidity, but because of it. President Fillmore knew Japan wouldn't respond to sweet talk. They would respond to spectacle, and Perry, with his long family lineage of naval service, his obsession with order, and his flair for controlled intimidation, was the man for the job. He had already served in the Mexican-American War, helped found the U.S. Naval Academy, and even championed steam-powered ships back when everyone else was still clinging to sails. Basically, if someone had to walk into a closed society and open it up with a mix of etiquette and armaments, it would be this man. You observe as Perry writes in his journal, noting everything from tides and troop formations to the demeanor of Japanese officials. The mission was about trade, yes, but also about coaling stations for US ships crossing to China. And Perry was determined that the US, not Britain or Russia, would take the lead in this Pacific game of imperial poker. And yet amid all this seriousness there are lighter touches. Perry had brought along a full band to play military marches and classical tunes during key meetings. The Japanese delegation, unfamiliar with brass instruments, reportedly thought the tuba was some kind of war horn. When the Americans played Hail Columbia, several samurai stiffened, unsure if it was a declaration of joy or war. One fringe detail that often gets buried, Perry reportedly also brought a daguerreotype camera, the cutting-edge photography tech of the day, and had photos taken of both Americans and Japanese. These early portraits are now ghostly time machines, showing the guarded stares and silk-layered caution of a society not yet ready for Kodak moments. But not all of Perry's team shared his restraint. One junior officer sketched caricatures of Japanese interpreters in his diary, noting their high voices and elaborate bows. You'd think someone arriving uninvited might show a bit more humility, but alas, 19th century manners had their blind spots. Historians still argue whether Perry truly understood the cultural magnitude of his intrusion or simply bulldozed forward under Washington's orders. Was he a tactful emissary or just the polite face of gunboat diplomacy? Some paint him as visionary, others as a man who couldn't see past his own reflection in the brass fittings. As you wander through the corridors of the ship, the scent of pipe tobacco and machine oil lingers. Officers rehearse their scripts, ready to present their gifts to the Japanese as signs of friendship, even if every handshake is shadowed by a cannon. Somewhere below deck, a machinist checks the parts of a curious American device, a miniature train engine, and several feet of track. It'll be revealed later, but even now the metal gleams with the quiet confidence of a country certain that steam can speak louder than swords. Perry, meanwhile, gazes out at the coastline. He isn't here to bluff. His ships aren't here to merely impress. This is a show of strength disguised as diplomacy. And in case the letter and the parrot weren't enough, there's always the 73 guns aboard the Mississippi. You lean against the rail watching the sun sink into the sea as the coastline shimmers gold. But for all the calm in the bay, there's something brewing beneath the surface. The shogunate hasn't yet responded, and the clock is ticking. Perry has already decided if they won't come to him, he'll go to them steam-powered and unsmiling. You find yourself in the polished corridors of Edo Castle, where the air is thick with incense and indecision. The tatami mats muffle footsteps, but the tension crackles like a storm ready to split the sky. At the heart of it all sits the Tokugawa Shogunate, a centuries-old system now facing an unfamiliar threat that smells like coal smoke and carries diplomatic papers sealed with wax and warning. Shogun Tokugawa Ieyoshi is technically in power, but in reality, much of the burden has already passed to his advisor, Abe Masahiro, and you can feel the weight pressing down on him like armor that doesn't quite fit. A respected elder statesman, Abe doesn't flinch at hardship, but this is something entirely different. Commodore Perry's visit has fractured the illusion that Japan's isolation Sakoku could protect it forever. The shogunate must now decide open the doors just a crack or risk having them kicked in. And the pressure isn't coming from just one direction. Within the castle walls there are endless debates. Some daimyo argue that Japan should stall, delay, and wait until the Americans simply go away. Others whisper of war, of rousing the samurai to repel the intruders by force. But deep down you sense the dread the cannons on those black ships could level entire districts before anyone had time to draw a katana. Still, tradition runs deep. Japan had rebuffed foreign incursions before. Just ask the Mongols. Twice they tried to land on Japanese shores and were famously defeated, thanks in part to timely typhoons the Japanese dubbed kamikaze or divine winds. But no storm came to sweep away Perry's steamships. No miracle gust blew smoke back into American lungs. This time, the divine winds were silent. Historians still argue whether the shogunate seriously considered a military response or merely postured for the sake of national pride. Records from the period hint at real contingency plans, stockpiles of gunpowder, reorganized garrisons, but just as often they dissolve into vague poetry and measured silence, hallmarks of a court unsure how to document its own vulnerability. You notice the odd contrast: samurai with ancestral swords now discussing Western firepower. The imperial court is distant symbolic, but the real control lies here, among bureaucrats and ministers who now exchange worried glances over maps and inked scrolls, tracing coastlines that suddenly seem very exposed. One often overlooked voice in this flurry of meetings was that of Hayashi Akira, a Confucian scholar and interpreter who helped bridge the linguistic and philosophical gap between Perry's blunt messages and Japan's refined manner of negotiation. Akira advocated for cautious openness, believing that Japan might gain more through learning than through resistance. But such positions were dangerous. Saying yes too soon could seem like cowardice. Saying no could provoke war. And then there's the curious matter of the court artists. Though photography was new, Japan still relied heavily on hand-painted records. You glance over shoulders as scribes sketch the strange foreign ships with almost mythical awe. One drawing exaggerates the black smoke to monstrous proportions, giving the ships the appearance of sea dragons belching fire, half metal, half myth. Outside the palace, word spreads like ink in water. Farmers, merchants, monks all talking about the Kurofune. Children reenact what little they've heard, mimicking the sound of cannon blasts and the rigid salutes of Western officers. Even geisha houses hum with gossip, their patrons nervously joking about mechanical beasts and foreign dignitaries who wear boots indoors. One fringe but fascinating rumor that springs up during this time, that Perry's ships were powered not by steam, but by captured demons bound beneath the decks. Some villagers swear they heard groaning from the hulls. Others insist that the Americans communicate using a dead language taught only to the sea. In times of upheaval, imagination always races ahead of fact. And as night falls over, Edo Abe Masahiro gathers his advisors one last time before delivering the shogunate's carefully calculated reply. They will not commit. Not yet. They will accept the letter. They will listen. They will consider opening ports, but no promises. Not until Perry returns. You sit in the quiet that follows, listening to the creak of old wood and the distant drumming of concern. For now, Japan will keep its gates closed, but only just. The rest of the world, however, has heard the hinges start to groan. You stroll down to the beach at Kurihama, where the Americans have pitched a small but unnervingly organized diplomatic encampment. There's an almost circus-like feel to it if circuses came with warships parked offshore. You hear the hiss of boiling water, the clink of metal tools, and the steady click-click of engineers assembling strange machines under canvas tents. This is no ordinary gift shop. This is the US Navy's version of show and tell, and you, along with a select group of wide-eyed Japanese observers, are about to be dazzled into submission. Commodore Perry has returned as promised, and this time it's not just 4 ships, it's 10. Bigger, louder, and more mechanized than anything Japan has ever seen. If the first visit was a polite knock, this is a battering ram with a bow tie. You can see the Japanese delegation stepping carefully across the prepared path, their sandals stirring up dust as they approach tents, flanked by guards in pristine uniforms. Every step is measured, every glance cautious. Inside the exhibition tents, Perry has laid out America's industrial best: telegraphs, firearms, clocks, agricultural tools, even a printing press. But the true centerpiece, resting behind a curtain of polished canvas and patriotic suspense, is a small steam-powered train complete with tracks, a functioning engine, and a tiny passenger car. It's like the world's most intimidating toy. The curtain is drawn back with flair, and there it is, a gleaming miniature locomotive painted black and brass, snorting gentle puffs of steam as it begins to circle the short track like an obedient mechanical puppy. You can't help but chuckle, because on one hand, it's adorable. On the other, it's a warning that says, our toys run on fire and iron, yours still eat hay. The Japanese observers lean in, eyebrows raised, fans fluttering slightly faster than before. Some smile politely, others remain stone-faced, but inside they're rattled. This little train embodies everything Japan has tried to keep out: movement, noise, change. One official whispers that it moves like a dragon's spine, others marvel at the foreign coal that smells like thunder and sulfur, and still others wonder aloud if this small marvel could one day grow large enough to run across the country. Historians still argue whether the gifts were intended primarily to impress or to intimidate. Perry called them gestures of friendship, but the underlying message was unmistakable. This is what we have. You can learn it, or you can face it. The Americans, sensing the intrigue, keep up the performance. They fire their telegraph and spell out simple messages in Morse code. They demonstrate a miniature electric motor, and somewhere a phonograph lets out scratchy music that seems to dance in the humid air. To the Japanese, many of whom had never seen such technology, the display borders on sorcery. One peculiar moment. When Japanese interpreters asked how the train engine worked, the American officer conducting the demo simply shrugged and said, "It's like a kettle that doesn't know when to stop." Not the most technical explanation, but effective. And certainly less patronizing than some other Western envoys who equated Japanese curiosity with backwardness. There's even a table laid out with American whiskey and biscuits, though the Japanese officials avoid the whiskey and focus on the machinery. You watch one delegate trace a finger along the brass rail, clearly unsure whether to be delighted or terrified. Probably both. Outside the tents, the Japanese make their own careful record. Sketch artists hurry to capture the contours of the train, the cogs, the pipes. Every detail is logged and sent back to Edo, where engineers and scholars try to decipher what this moving kettle means for Japan's future. And among the American crew, they're aware of the effect they're having. Some joke among themselves that they've just given a samurai a glimpse of the future. One sailor is even caught trying to ride the tiny train until an officer barks him off like a misbehaving terrier. But the real show isn't the train, it's what the train represents: movement, power, transformation, and an ultimatum wrapped in whimsy. You can almost hear the unspoken message puffing out with every steam whistle: join the age of industry or be run over by it. And as the sun dips low and the American tents begin to dim, the Japanese delegation steps away from the buzzing contraptions and glowing lamps, their silence louder than any cannon. They've seen the future, and it runs on rails. You crouch low near the polished track as the miniature locomotive exhales, a soft hiss, steam rising like breath from the nostrils of a slumbering beast. The Japanese delegation watches unmoving, their eyes locked on the tiny train as it completes another circuit with a metallic purr. It's small, yes, but it moves with the confidence of something inevitable. You can almost see the gears turning in their minds as well, the unspoken fear that this charming little toy might be less a gift and more a prophecy on wheels. The train set gifted by Commodore Perry was more than mechanical amusement. It was a masterstroke of symbolic pressure, a piece of Americana in motion puffing a gentle but unmistakable message: we build, we move, we don't wait for permission. While the Americans saw it as goodwill wrapped in ingenuity, the Japanese saw layers deeper. A locomotive in miniature might mean railroads in reality, foreign ones, maybe even armed ones. And that in a land where ox carts were still the norm, struck like thunder on a clear day. One of the officials, a mid-ranking retainer from the Satsuma domain, reportedly muttered, "It moves without a horse," a phrase that circulated like wildfire among interpreters and artists. The phrase took on a haunting tone, almost accusatory, as if the laws of nature themselves had been rewritten. Historians still argue whether this demonstration directly inspired Japan's eventual embrace of Western industrial tech, but many agree it planted a seed, one that would sprout not just into trains, but into telegraphs, shipyards, and textile mills within a few decades. At the time, though, the train was still just a marvel, a metaphor, a message no sword could cut. But there's more. The Americans didn't just leave the locomotive behind, they gave instructions on how it worked, diagrams, measurements. Some suggest this was genuine goodwill, others suspect it was a calculated nudge, encouraging Japanese engineers to try replicating the device, and in doing so, unknowingly, begin the slow process of westernization. You overhear debates unfolding in the nearby tents. Japanese scholars argue over whether this train defies Buddhist principles of balance and stillness. Others worry about the implications of combustion noise and foreign iron invading the land. And a few quietly wonder how they could build one of their own. Meanwhile, outside the official sphere, the gossip travels faster than steam. In the streets of Uraga and Edo, stories of a metal dragon that breathes smoke spread like wildfire. Children pretend to drive invisible trains, running in circles and yelling choo-choo in a mangled imitation of what they'd heard. One woodblock print even exaggerates the scene into a rolling monster with human faces peeking from windows, part gift, part ghost. There's a lesser-known story, though. A young Japanese artisan reportedly snuck into the tent after hours disguised as a cleaner and sketched the train's engine in obsessive detail. Some claim his notes helped create one of Japan's first domestic engines years later. True or not, it's a satisfying image, curiosity surviving protocol. The shogunate, still hesitant, collects the American gifts and stores them in guarded compounds in Edo. There, the items are examined with equal parts admiration and suspicion. The train in particular is said to have been disassembled and reassembled multiple times by teams of scholars and smiths, each trying to unlock its secrets like a sacred scroll. But there's a problem: they lack the coal, the steel, the infrastructure. The train isn't just an invention, it's a system, and Japan, still cloaked in feudal traditions and rigid class roles, is not ready to lay tracks just yet. And still the dilemma grows. Accepting the gift means accepting its implications. Rejecting it means appearing ungrateful or worse, hostile. So the shogunate walks a narrow path, displaying the items in public ceremonies, but with a certain restraint, as if to say, we see you, we understand, but we're not quite buying it yet. You watch a group of young samurai peer at the train from behind a rope barrier. One frowns deeply, murmuring something about the soul of the nation. Another shrugs fingers the hilt of his sword and says, "But it moves faster than any horse." And in that quiet exchange you feel the whole country poised on the edge of transformation, one foot in the old world, the other, however reluctantly, riding rails into the new. As the day fades, the delegation boards their boats, paddling back toward the mainland. The black ships remain anchored, their smokestacks still quietly puffing against the purple sky. Behind you, the tiny locomotive rests still warm like a foreign thought, whispering, "What if this is the future?" You sit beside a low table in a narrow chamber in Yokohama, watching as ink brushes dance across parchment with the gravity of swords. The atmosphere is thick with incense and compromise. It's March 31st, 1854, and Japan is about to sign something it hasn't signed in over 2 centuries, a treaty with a Western nation. The Treaty of Kanagawa lies on the floor between the 2 delegations, its kanji characters whispering both possibility and surrender. A document dressed as diplomacy, but carrying the heavy boots of gunboat reality. Commodore Perry stands at attention, flanked by officers in blue and brass. His expression is as neutral as the bay's surface, polished, unreadable, unmoved. Across from him, the Japanese envoys kneel in stiff formation, expressions carved from stone. No one moves casually here. Every breath is deliberate, every gesture is a negotiation. The treaty isn't long, but it's sharp. 2 ports, Shimoda and Hakodate, will be opened to American ships. Shipwrecked U.S. sailors must be treated kindly, not imprisoned or executed, as was once the policy. A U.S. consulate will be established, and perhaps most crucially, the treaty lays groundwork for future agreements, ones that in time will crack Japan's isolation wide open. But make no mistake, this isn't a win for Japan. It's the beginning of a diplomatic retreat under the guise of hospitality. The black ships may be quiet now, but everyone here knows what they're capable of if displeased. You can feel it in the rigid posture of the scribes, the way one samurai subtly fingers the hilt of his blade, as if daring the tide to change course. Historians still argue whether the shogunate had any real choice. Some claim they could have resisted longer, that their navy, while outdated, still held some defensive potential. Others say resistance would have led to swift devastation, especially given how China had just been humiliated in the Opium Wars. The memory of British gunboats sailing up the Pearl River was fresh and sobering. The signing ceremony has no fireworks, no grand speeches, just quiet, meticulous movements, brushed to paper, sealed to parchment, and the sound of centuries shifting. One American officer jokes that the Japanese diplomats signed with the calm of men purchasing tea, but you sense something deeper in their silence. They're not conceding. They're adapting. As the treaty is folded and sealed, Perry offers his thanks. He doesn't bow. Instead, he nods curtly, as though to say, "Well done, you've made the correct decision." The Japanese delegation bows deeply in return, but no one misses the flicker of resentment in their eyes. Gratitude is not what's written in their expressions. Survival is. Outside, the black ships remain looming like sentinels of a new order. Their guns don't fire, their crews don't celebrate. Instead, they begin preparing for departure, their mission complete. But you know this isn't an ending, it's a spark. A spark that will catch and spread through every layer of Japanese society like fire under old thatch. In the days that follow, the treaty is printed, copied, discussed. In tea houses and temples, people speak its terms with awe and anxiety. Samurai grumble about foreign pollution. Merchants wonder about the new goods they might sell. And scholars begin writing letters to other scholars. What do the Americans want? What can we learn from them? And what might they take next? But perhaps the most revealing moment comes when a young Japanese envoy, after the signing, reportedly turns to an American sailor and asks, "Is your land always this loud?" The sailor laughs, not quite understanding, "But you do." The envoy isn't talking about noise. He's talking about presence, about pressure, about a world that moves fast and talks louder than tradition can bear. One often overlooked detail. The Americans gave commemorative medals to the Japanese delegates, little coins bearing eagles and olive branches. Most were accepted politely, tucked away. But a few were quietly melted down. Not as an insult, but as a ritual cleansing of memory, a symbolic effort to purify the metal before it became part of a very different future. As Perry departs with his fleet, the smoke trails behind the ships like black lace across the sky. The sea is calm again, but the silence it leaves behind is not peace. It's preparation. And back in Edo, the council gathers once more. The shogun's advisors read the treaty aloud. Some nod, others remain silent. But everyone knows this train has started moving, and there's no track leading back. You drift now through the back corridors of Edo, where the lacquered walls echo with footsteps far more restless than before. The treaty has been signed, the ships have gone, and yet nothing feels still. You sense it in the sideways glances of the samurai on patrol, in the measured, too careful tones of the scribes, and especially in the sudden popularity of foreign studies. Japan hasn't been conquered, no, but it has been cracked open, and the reverberations are starting to shake the beams of the old house. Inside a government chamber, Abe Masahiro, who led the negotiations, faces harsh whispers. Once respected for steering Japan through Perry's arrival without bloodshed, he's now accused by many of cowardice, even betrayal. Not openly, of course, because this is still Tokugawa Japan, but the silence around him is colder than steel. He'll be replaced within the year, his health faltering along with his favor. Outside the halls of government, the ripple turns into a wave. In domains like Satsuma and Choshu, powerful daimyo begin to ask dangerous questions. Why should the shogunate lead if it can't defend the nation? These domains, fiercely proud and already semi-autonomous, start to modernize on their own. They secretly import Western weapons, study shipbuilding, and send envoys disguised as merchants to learn about steam engines. The future is knocking, and some aren't waiting for it to be officially invited. You hear murmurs in temples too. Buddhist and Shinto monks, long cornerstones of village life, begin to feel uneasy about the foreign influence seeping in. They speak of imbalance of kami disturbed. Some claim the black ships carried not just men and machines, but restless spirits from beyond the waves. Historians still argue whether the spiritual resistance to westernization was genuine or exaggerated in later records. Some believe monks truly feared cultural annihilation, others see it as poetic myth-making to dramatize the inevitable. Either way, it's clear that Japan is awakening not peacefully, but with a kind of brittle, electrified clarity. One curious incident. A traveling kabuki troupe stages a play loosely based on Perry's arrival, thinly veiled as a mythological tale involving demon ships, a stoic emperor, and a laughing foreign god who brings both fire and gifts. The play is banned almost immediately, but not before packed houses watch it breath-held, recognizing all too well the metaphors carved into its wooden masks. And beneath the surface, discontent begins to stir, not just in noble courts and merchant shops, but in the barracks. The samurai class, proud but increasingly marginalized, finds itself unsure where it fits in a world of gunboats and treaties. You pass a tea house near a garrison and hear low voices debating whether to challenge the shogunate itself. There's talk, dangerous talk of restoring imperial power, not just in name, but in fact. The phrase, "Sono Joy, revere, the emperor, expel the barbarians," returns to circulation like an old war banner being unrolled. And in Kyoto, cloaked in tradition and imperial mystique, the emperor's court listens. For centuries, the emperor has been a symbolic figure, more god than ruler, revered but politically irrelevant. Now young radicals speak of turning that symbol into a sword. Meanwhile, ordinary people feel the shift too. Merchants start importing foreign cloth. A few daring shipbuilders begin crafting vessels with iron plating and hybrid sails. And students, they devour whatever foreign texts they can find. Dutch learning, rangaku, had always existed quietly in academic corners. Now it spreads like wildfire, aided by the realization that the world outside Japan isn't just curious, it's coming. One fringe detail you overhear at a port. A group of fishermen believe the black ships left behind ghost lights in the water, blue glows that appear on foggy nights, swirling like jellyfish but never quite natural. Some think it's the spirits of drowned ancestors rising to protest foreign intrusion. Others think it's just phosphorescent plankton. Either way, people keep their distance. The shogunate, for its part, tries to project confidence. Officials issue proclamations assuring the public that the situation is under control, that the treaties are minor adjustments. That tradition endures. But the brushstrokes of these announcements grow shakier and the seals less firm. You drift now along the coastline of Hakodate, where foreign sails appear not just as rare curiosities, but as increasingly regular visitors. The ink on the Treaty of Kanagawa is barely dry, yet the scent of opportunity or vulnerability has already carried across oceans. Commodore Perry may have been first, but he will not be last. And Japan, still catching its breath now, finds itself playing host to a parade of unfamiliar flags. The Russians arrive next, led by Vice Admiral Yevgeny Putyutin, whose name sounds like it belongs in a chess match more than a diplomatic mission. Still, he moves quickly, securing a treaty in 1855 that mirrors the Americans' opening. More ports offering consular presence and, just for fun, redefining the Russo-Japanese border near the Kuril Islands. You watch as his bearded silhouette walks calmly through Hakodate's harbourside markets, followed by aides who scribble furiously every time someone points to a new mineral deposit. Not long after the British drop anchor, never one's to miss a party when there are trade routes involved. And then the Dutch, who'd had exclusive access for over 200 years, arrive looking mildly betrayed, as though someone just turned their private sushi bar into a buffet. Each nation brings its own blend of civility and suggestion, its own gifts and threats, its own versions of Perry's train set. The once secluded archipelago is becoming an international showroom. You find yourself in one of the newly opened port cities, Shimoda or Nagasaki, where architecture starts to change before your eyes. Shutters appear on windows, glass becomes common. Chimneys rise from buildings that once relied solely on charcoal braziers. The streets echo with new sounds, the rhythmic clatter of typewriters, the hum of new printing presses the clinking of foreign coins. Change isn't creeping, it's sprinting. Historians still argue whether Japan had a true choice in this multi-front embrace of Western powers. Was it tactful diplomacy that prevented colonization, or merely good luck that foreign powers preferred commerce over conquest? Some point to the resilience of Japanese governance. Others suggest the West simply found juicier targets elsewhere, like China and Southeast Asia, and spared Japan the same fate, at least for the moment. But make no mistake, the pressure is immense. Each treaty opens more ports, sets more precedents, and forces the shogunate to make promises it barely understands, let alone can enforce. Domestic backlash intensifies. The Sono-joi revere the emperor. Expel the barbarians movement grows more radical. Assassinations of pro-foreign officials increase. Even minor interpreters are watched with suspicion, their allegiance questioned every time they bow to a foreign guest. And yet, not everyone resists. In Osaka and Edo, a new class of merchant scholar emerges, pragmatists who see opportunity in the chaos. They import textiles, acquire printing contracts, translate Western textbooks, and begin writing tracts about civilization and enlightenment. These are the early architects of the Meiji Restoration, even if they don't know it yet. You overhear one of them describing the foreign influx as a tsunami of new tools. Not a flood to fear, but one to harness. He holds up a compass and a French dictionary with equal reverence. Back on the docks, another quiet transformation unfolds. Samurai, traditionally forbidden from trading or manual labor, are seen helping unload cargo from foreign ships, first in secret, then in plain sight. The lines blur. Class rigidity wobbles. You watch a middle-ranking samurai trade his daisho, the twin swords of his status, for a ledger and a shipping contract. No one laughs. No one dares. One odd detail. Some samurai begin wearing modified Western boots under their hakama trousers, still loyal to tradition on the outside, but ready to run fast if needed. It becomes a small symbol of the times, half in, half out. And foreign presence isn't just limited to politics and trade. In Nagasaki, you pass a music hall where locals gather to hear Western instruments. A young boy taps out a rudimentary tune on a borrowed piano, while his older sister carefully copies English lyrics into a notebook. Neither understands the words yet, but they're determined to learn. Not everyone shares the enthusiasm. You walk through a temple garden where a group of monks pray for the cleansing of the air now polluted by foreign iron and industry. One sprinkles salt along a new stone path, murmuring blessings meant to shield the temple from Western spiritual debris. It's half ritual, half protest. And the shogunate, it reels. Each new treaty weakens its authority. The chain of command frays. Communication lines stretch too thin. When French and British advisors begin visiting not just ports, but inner regions offering advice on everything from military drills to street lighting, you realize the shogunate is no longer steering the ship. It's clinging to the rail as foreign winds blow harder than ever. You step back and look at the landscape: old houses with new chimneys, shrines next to telegraph poles, kimono-clad elders watching curious children read Dutch manuals. You can almost hear the clinking of future gears, the rumbling of trains not yet built. Japan isn't colonized, but it is being transformed. Every handshake, every treaty, every puff of steam, dragging it sometimes unwillingly toward a future already mapped out in foreign ink. You now find yourself wandering through the bustle of a rapidly changing Edo, soon to be renamed Tokyo, where the air hums with a mix of wood smoke, coal dust, and the sharp tang of progress. The year is edging toward the dawn of the Meiji era, and the quiet hum of steam power is swelling into a full-throated roar. This is the era born from the collision of centuries-old tradition and the unstoppable march of industrialization, sparked in part by that curious toy train Perry once brought ashore. The Meiji government, eager to catch up with the West, embarks on a frenzy of reforms. Railways snake across the archipelago, connecting ports to cities, cities to countryside. Factories sprout like bamboo shoots after rain, and Western-style schools teach everything from mathematics to English literature. Samurai once, warriors become bureaucrats, businessmen, or soldiers in a modern conscript army. You watch young men in navy blue uniforms practicing drills with rifles that would have been unrecognizable to their forebears. The train Perry introduced once, a quaint curiosity, is now emblematic of this new age. Japan's first full-scale railway, built with British assistance, opens in 1872, linking Tokyo and Yokohama. Steam engines thunder where once only horses trotted, and the rhythm of progress echoes across mountains and valleys. Historians still argue whether this rapid modernization was a calculated strategy or a desperate scramble to survive. Some see Meiji leaders as visionary architects, others as reactive pragmatists forced into change by foreign pressure. But there's no doubt the process was both exhilarating and painful, tearing at the fabric of society as old roles vanished and new ones emerged. You catch sight of foreign advisors, once guests, now embedded in ministries and factories, advising on everything from naval tactics to textile production. The line between friend and overseer blurs. The country is absorbing knowledge at a dizzying pace, eager to shed its past, yet tethered to it by memory and culture. Among the common folk, the response is mixed. Some embrace Western clothes, foods, and ideas with enthusiasm, eager to join the global conversation. Others cling to kimono tea ceremonies and ancestral worship, seeing in modernization a threat to their identity. This tension fuels debates, protests, and sometimes violence. And beneath it all, the spirit of the train remains. It's a symbol of connectivity, linking islands, people, and ideas, but also of speed, inevitability, and power. The railways carry goods and soldiers alike, fueling economic growth and military strength. One lesser-known but fascinating tidbit: early Japanese engineers experimented with coal imported from the United States, some of it originally brought during Perry's mission. That very coal powered the first locomotives, its black flakes a literal fuel for transformation. Elsewhere, artists blend Western realism with traditional styles, capturing scenes of factories alongside cherry blossoms. Musicians incorporate Western instruments into classical Japanese compositions, creating sounds both new and familiar. The country is becoming a tapestry woven from many threads. The legacy of that small train set and Perry's threat is undeniable. They marked the beginning of a journey from closed fortress to global player, a journey fueled by steam, steel, and a determination to survive and thrive. And as the sun sets over Tokyo Station, the sound of a distant locomotive whistle cuts through the evening air, a reminder that the tracks laid in those tense days of 1853 still guide Japan's path forward. You return now to the quiet shore where it all began, Edo Bay, transformed now into bustling Tokyo Bay. The black ships have long vanished, their iron hulks rusted or repurposed, but the echoes of their arrival linger like the gentle murmur of waves against the docks. The small train, set once a curious novelty and veiled threat, has grown into a network of rails, threading the nation together, carrying dreams, goods, and people faster than anyone in Perry's time could have imagined. Japan today is unrecognizable from the isolated archipelago that faced Commodore Perry's stern gaze. Factories rise beside temples, telegraph wires crisscross above traditional wooden homes. Soldiers march in formations modeled after Western armies, their uniforms a patchwork of East and West. Yet beneath this whirlwind of change, ancient customs quietly endure, blending with innovation in ways both seamless and jarring. Historians still debate the legacy of Perry's arrival and that symbolic train set. Was it the beginning of a reluctant capitulation or a masterstroke that propelled Japan onto the world stage? Some say it forced Japan to modernize before it was too late. Others argue it sowed division and cultural loss, but no one denies it was a moment that irrevocably altered the course of a nation. The Japanese themselves have a layered view. There is pride in the rapid rise from feudal isolation to industrial power, but also nostalgia for a time when the rhythm of life was slower, the seasons marked by silence and ritual rather than steam and industry. You can still find elders telling stories of black ships and strange gifts, their voices soft but steady like the passing of a shadow. One curious story tells of a preserved piece of the original miniature locomotive kept carefully in a Kyoto museum wrapped in silk and lacquer. It's said children place their hands upon it for luck, whispering wishes for journeys yet to come. A tangible link to a past both frightening and hopeful. And in the quiet moments by the bay, when the city's roar softens and the stars peek through a thin veil of smog, you might just hear the distant whistle of that first train, carrying with it the weight of history, progress, and the endless push forward. So as you settle into the warmth of your bed, feel the soft hum of a world forever changed by steam and steel friendship and threat gifts and guns. Remember the train that came on black ships, puffing a message that still echoes, change is coming whether you're ready or not. Now as the night deepens and your eyelids grow heavy, let the gentle rhythm of history's wheels slow to a peaceful halt. Imagine the quiet shoreline where centuries ago black ships steamed through mist and uncertainty, leaving behind a small toy train, soft mechanical breathing against the vastness of tradition. That train carried more than coal and metal. It carried the promise of transformation, the tension between old and new, and the unyielding pulse of progress. Let your mind drift like cherry blossom petals falling on calm waters, each one a whispered story of courage, change, and adaptation. Picture the people who lived through those days, some fearful, some curious, some determined, and know that their struggles and hopes ripple through time to touch you now. The future often arrives wrapped in surprise steam and whispered threats, but it is also filled with opportunity and resilience. As you breathe deeply, feel the soft hum of trains running through the landscape of your dreams, carrying you gently toward rest and renewal. Sleep now embraced by history's quiet lessons and the soothing promise that tomorrow holds new tracks to follow. Sweet dreams.